Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, it's our pleasure to show the award-winning Chinese film, The Day the Sun Turned Cold. Now, this is a murder mystery, but a murder mystery with more, a number of levels of significance and commentary upon Chinese society and upon Chinese history. We'll be talking about that and much more after today's screening with an expert guest. It's our pleasure to welcome Professor Jerome Silbergeld of Princeton University, a noted expert on Chinese art and cinema. Now, take this opportunity to visit northern China in The Day the Sun Turned Cold. Welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to see a multiple award-winning film and an extraordinarily rich film. We have 30 minutes to chat about that, and it's a pleasure to welcome here on City Cinematheque for the first time Professor Jerome Silbergeld from Princeton University. He's on the faculty there of art history with a specialty in Chinese art and Chinese cinema, among other things. He's written extensively on Chinese cinema, and indeed a full chapter of one of his books is on this film itself. That book is Hitchcock with a Chinese Face, Cinematic Doubles, Oedipal Triangles, and China's Moral Voice. Welcome, Jerome. Pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Let's start our discussion of Chinese cinema in a certain sense where you started with Hitchcock. What brings Hitchcock together with this film from your point of view?
Well, I didn't actually start with Hitchcock. I started with 3 films that didn't fit into my previous book, and I realized they were just too good to pass up. But Hitchcock was one of those things that I found in thinking about these films that in a way ran through them all, that gave me a rationale for bringing one film from the People's Republic, one from Taiwan, and one from Hong Kong together. As they seemed...
I'm going to stop you just one second and point out to our viewers that actually they might not know it, but the film we're talking about, The Day the Sun Turned Cold,
Hong Kong,
shot in China but made by a Hong Kong filmmaker.
Exactly,
Please.
Which is unusual, but becoming more and more common.
Right.
Was certainly unusual then because that was before the reversion of Hong Kong to the People's Republic. At any rate, what I saw initially and what one would see stylistically is 3 very different films. On a deeper reading becomes something that runs through all of these films. What they have in common, of which Hitchcock in a way is an indicator, is this very deep and very knowledgeable engagement with Western cinema, Western culture, Western thought. In this particular case, more than the others, Western psychology.
Yeah.
So this film engaged me at 3 different levels. Like Hitchcock, you start out with the question of, is there a crime? It's not like whodunit, because you don't know if anything's been done.
Right.
And it begins with a young man, early 20s, riding a bicycle to a police station and claiming that some time ago, 10 years in fact, his mother murdered his father. To which people say in their own minds, is this kid nuts?
Yeah.
And you don't know for the bulk of the film, most of the duration of the film, whether he is or whether he isn't.
Right.
In fact, you are led to think one thing and then another, and again in a kind of a Hitchcockian way, and I'm not going to tell you whether there was a crime, whether she did do it or not. But that very fact raises the issue of whether this is reality or whether this is a fantasy, and then you're taken in by necessity into another level of thinking.
Right.
And that is the thinking itself. Is this just a figment of some kind of an imagination, and if so, what does it have to do with relationship with mom and pop? This is not at all common. It's most unusual in a Chinese film to dwell in the inner life of an individual, in the fantasy life, and in the what ultimately is the sexual relationship of a child to his parents, as well as to a triangulated outsider, because somewhere along the way, Dad did die, Mom did remarry, And the child is the product of that very convoluted relationship between a troubled marriage and an equally troubled remarriage.
Right.
There are jealousies, there are all of the Freudian elements that could be there. One doesn't have to bring them there, you can find them there so readily, and that is, once again, something I can't name another Chinese film that has all of those ingredients. Well thought out, well established, it sustains a perfectly psychoanalytic reading, which again is Hitchcockian,
right.
Because he was so deeply involved in the 50s, especially in analysis.
Well, let me just stop for a second. Now, this is something that comes about as a consequence of we can talk about the specific director, but also generationally it takes place because Chinese directors from the various Chinese communities of Asia have now unprecedented access to Western cinema and have a level of comfort in a certain way in going to the buffet of world cinema and choosing the dishes you want, instead of, for whatever reasons, of whether it be censorship, you can't see things, or whether it be out of a kind of nationalistic pride, you don't take foreign cultures and do things with them. You must stay within your culture. Now there's this notion of, well, wait a minute, maybe we can learn some things about ourselves by using these other tools, and whether that be psychoanalysis or whether that be Western film genres or Western literary genres.
We take a child, we take an infant, and in 22 years we teach them language. They teach themselves partly, but they acquire language, they acquire social skills, and we get them through college.
Yeah.
It takes about 22 years in the ordinary college experience, and that's exactly how long the Chinese have been making, in a sense, post-Maoist film, from 1984, 1985 to the present. I wrote a book before I started writing about Chinese cinema. It was my second book on contemporary China, and it was the first book on a Chinese artist born, bred, raised in the People's Republic, post-Mao.
Okay.
And is within the few years before that book was written, going back to 1983, he was in political trouble. He was actually fleeing the law for a number of missteps, which included having a bookshelf full of Picasso, Monet, things that were either overtly sexual or overtly bourgeois. 1985 is when the modern Chinese film begins, 84, 85. That's just about the length of time it takes to get a kid through college so that they can talk about Freud, Dostoevsky, Faulkner, Joyce with you. The Chinese filmmakers have picked all of this up, and they know this material as well as our best graduating college students. They know it deeply, they know it intuitively now, and they're using it with great sophistication.
Another way
aspects of it.
No, I was just going to say another way of saying that, and this is, I think, just maybe pushing the door open or using a slightly different wording, is that we have the late or delayed arrival of modernity in China, but with that comes the artistic heritage of modernism. And now, of course, of postmodernism as well. So all of these artists are, as modernity itself arrives in post-Mao China, and all of the other Chinese communities that are seen in relationship with it, so too they're uploading all of these legacies of modernist and postmodernist art.
I want to quibble a little bit, because they understood Maoism, Marxism, to be modernity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they regarded most bourgeois Westernisms as kind of retardataire. Yeah. They saw themselves as being in the vanguard. So what they're doing in this post-Maoist, post-socialist period is equipping themselves with another modernity.
I think that's a better phrase. I mean, I was being naively chauvinist, because you're right. These are competing theories of modernity, or competing understandings of what constitutes modernity. Absolutely.
But they have equipped themselves exceedingly well. And this really, what's striking about this film is that it gets down to one of those last horizons, one of those last frontiers, which is the inner modernity, the inner life, and to deal with the psychology of the mind, which really is a breaking point for a society that has had a particular mode. I don't want to say China's unchanging, but neither is it totally changing.
Right.
There are some very significant, if not constants, then at least things which are very slow to change and evolve over 2,000 years' time. And one of them is the way in which the family works and where you owe your social obligations. This film raises those questions of what are the primary obligations, and it works it out in what may sound to the anthropologist as a bit corny, but it really comes out to this issue of, is your first priority to deal with issues in the question of when things go wrong, when there is grave social transgression, which there is in every life, in every society, how do you deal with it? Do you deal with it in terms of shame, or do you deal with it in terms of guilt? Now, shame and guilt go together.
Yeah.
But where they divide has to do with guilt is largely an internal issue until it is spilled out.
Right.
But it is largely something that one carries. Shame is something that, put it this way, for the sake of familial shame, you don't expose your guilt.
Well put.
And this goes to the core. When the young man shows up at the police station, people can't believe that for the sake of feeling guilty about something or exposing the family guilt, that he would incur public shame.
Right.
And so they withdraw, and the whole film withdraws with them. They have to essentially prove that this kid is or is not living this fantasy life and taking it out. There is a very important attachment. It's a small attachment, and not too much is made of it, but it is critical, where he's gotten this idea, in part, we're told early on, you see it sort of spills out of his book bag, is reading French literature.
That's right.
And so this idea that one would spill one's guts, one's sense of guilt, and say, there's wrong here, my family is guilty, and it has to be acknowledged and dealt with. We cannot bottle it up, even for the sense of shame. We're told, essentially, that's a Western phenomenon. And it does bring the West and the East into a kind of conflict. So with this film that, first of all, gives you a mystery, and second of all, gives you an inner life behind the mystery with a lot of Freudian attachment, you then are left with the third level, which is critical, and this is the cultural, political level.
Absolutely.
Where you, following everybody else in the film, are wondering what drives this and what is going to be the upshot of pitting guilt versus shame, of pitting the Chinese way of dealing with things against what is seen as a Western way of dealing with things. And so it does become a kind of a vehicle for the whole question of modernization. Mm-hmm. If one modernizes, if one raises high-rise buildings, if one opens up a market economy as opposed to the state, the centralized economy that China had been under Maoist regime. How far is one going to go with that modernity? Or, in fact, once one starts going, can you stop?
Right.
Can you hold the line when it comes to issues of these kinds of basic family structures, basic psychological structures? What this really ends up being, without giving away the details, is a kind of a train wreck. It doesn't predict good things for China, but it does sort of suggest that this is a non-stop train. It's going to go all of the way there, and this kid is riding in the front of the train.
Well, two things that come to mind from those comments is, one, much of the film takes place, in this 10 years earlier.
Yes.
And it takes place in this, impoverished rural, economy. By the time the young man is coming to the police, he's defined as being involved in the in the new industry. He is industrial proletariat. He's living in the dormitories, and the key person, the key male, is in the older section is, of course, his own father, who's a school principal who has a certain kind of authority within Chinese culture, but specifically in the culture of Maoist China. And now we're in a much more industrial setting, and we have a policeman who's much more recognizable as is in a certain sense the father-like urban cop, who is dealing just with all the bad stuff that comes along with modernity and trying to sort out, in a certain sense, the good guys from the bad guys, who's surrounded by trickster characters, like the person who had poisoned his cigarette at some, at some point, and he becomes this, father confessor character.
Well, I liken him to an analyst,
And
he does befriend the child without letting go of his reserve or his skepticism about the kid. But he takes them on, and he takes him on with a real interest in the inner life of the child, because as a policeman, that's part of what he's got to figure out. Is this a fantasy? Is this really a crime that occurred? Does it really belong in his bailiwick? And so he crosses that line, and he befriends the child in a way that may not be appropriate, but drives the narrative forward. Repeatedly, he opens up the inner life of the child, and in response to him, we have these flashbacks that take you back to the childhood itself before the crime was committed.
Well, and that's also part of, as you've already pointed out, that's also part of the generic shift of the film, or a generic enrichment of it, because from the simple notion of who done it, or was it done, we move into this whole sphere of psychological analysis, which includes the fact of, to what degree is this young man reliable? Where's the line between his fantasies about his parents and the evidence? So we're into a whole other sphere and into a relationship that goes well beyond that of traditional relationship of detection and the sphere that is a wonderful genre, the police procedural, but that ultimately stays within the limits of the rules of evidence and proof.
The police procedural is interesting because in traditional China, as well as in Maoist China, you don't bring a case until it's a closed case. You don't quite see the inspection of things. And here you're really you're not looking at a closed case, you're looking at an open case.
Right.
You're looking at that inspection, and what you're looking at with that inspection is a child who is even into his 20s. He is the extreme product of a disturbed marriage. And he looks, for all intents and purposes, like a perfectly controlled kid. But therein lies the problem. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he doesn't party, he doesn't do women. He's living an isolate existence, all alone, socially cut off, basically living within the framework of his own mind,
right,
which is something that really drives the question of, is he only in his own mind? Yeah. Is he fabricating this? And then you have to deal with the question. If he's fabricating this, what does it go to? It goes to that relationship between son and father, right, between son and mother. He has, with this very authoritarian father, who is in equal parts Confucianistic and a good communist authority figure, not a masculine figure, sort of a wimpy guy who is cuckolded. Yeah. Publicly, everybody knows it, but who retains the support of the community because he's righteous within the framework of the times. The son both hates the father, is beaten mercilessly by the father, is denounced on occasion by the father, is disowned on occasion by the father, is suggested by the father that he's not even legitimate in one of his slanders. He calls him, "You young bastard,"
Yeah, that's right.
Which raises the question of what's the relationship? If he's a bastard, where does that come from? What's the relationship between father and mother? The mother relationship, on the other hand, is a very warm, very loving relationship. And within that particular triangle, you have a son who's ready to hate the father, who's ready to kill the father because the father's ready to kill him, a relationship with a mother that's very warm, and yet by taking the case to the police, he's ready to have his mother killed too. Yeah. So you have the potential here for a double parricide.
Indeed.
Or a parricide-matricide, right, though you don't know if either of them's ever come off or going to come off. So it is this triangulated kind of mystery that then becomes elaborated once Dad is dead and Mother remarries, whereas you might think in a Freudian sense, now the son's got his aha moment. Now I can become one with my mother. Mother takes on another relationship, and that relationship is equally poisoned. And so the question is that relationship, this outsider who the mother is remarried to, is he complicit in the murder that may or may not have taken in the first place? And how does the jealous son, who thought now's my time, and then gets pushed aside by yet another party, how does he deal with that? Is that just the modicum for thinking, oh, these guys who are pushing me aside, they must have poisoned Dad?
Yeah.
So this is very Hitchcockian in structure.
Absolutely. Now let's. I want to return from a slightly different angle because there's another level we want to go to here, and that is just to remind people that this is a Hong Kong filmmaker back in the early to mid '90s, before the turnover, making this highly Hitchcockian psychological film set in the People's Republic of China. So this invariably raises the question of to what degree this film is everything we've said it is, but also there's a level of political allegory here. What do you? What's your take on that one, sir?
We always run our risks, and here comes the biggest risk.
Okay.
You know, when you get to this level 3 of, well, what's the point? You know, what's your interpretation? What does it really add up to? You can go too far, but the parallels are all there. You have this very troubled relationship between two parents, and the byproduct of that is an equally troubled child. Where do you fit Hong Kong into such a relationship? Hong Kong is this small community, this child of China, which has a very problematic relationship right over its shoulder with the People's Republic, which you can think of as Pop, the authoritarian figure. It has a relationship with Britain, which is its current parent, the troubled, to say the least, poisoned relationship between Hong Kong, the People's Republic, and England, where England took over Hong Kong over the whole issue of opium, poisoning, and caught in the midst of that is this helpless little island, you know, just this little vulnerable, troubled child that never managed to establish his own identity, who may be homosexual, is a way of saying, you know, I'm not gonna deal with Dad, I'm just gonna hold back until Mom is available to me. But all of those kinds of pieces of the puzzle fit together in a political interpretation. That's the farthest you can take it. Even if you back off a little bit from that, you still have that cultural interpretation of PRC represents the most Chinese of things. Britain represents the West, and Hong Kong really is in the middle. It really is the kind of bastard offspring of this unmarried relationship between Hong Kong, between Great Britain and the People's Republic.
And you think, by the way, that given when this film was released, and it was released with great acclaim, winner of a number of international awards, which I certainly think it merits in those ways. But this kind of allegorical reading would be more, how should I put it, transparent to a Chinese audience. That it would, because I think our tendency is to grab onto the rich psychological interpretation as the first thing.
On our own, I don't think we would. That would never come to mind. We just wouldn't think of that. I wouldn't say by the time this film was done, but certainly within a couple of years afterwards, you will find Chinese critics saying, enough of this. There was, in fact, quite a bit of it. And Yim Ho himself had one prior movie where, once again in an allegorical way, but in an undeniable way, he was fitting out this future relationship of the re-engagement of Hong Kong to the People's Republic and how troubled he expected that to be.
Okay, well that leaves us on a very nice open note for the end of the show, so people can come back and think through some of these issues through the other films that they see. If If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque or about City University Television, please visit our website. Our address is www.cuny.tv. There you're going to find information about all of our programming, as well as click-ons so you can communicate with us by email. Once again, for more information, please visit www.cuny.tv. Jerome, I want to thank you for being here, bringing a rich interpretation to a very, very rich film for us, and I hope we'll have a chance to see you again here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. And I hope you have taken some pleasure from this film and from our discussion, and I hope you'll join us again as we stroll through the archives of film history. In any case, thanks for being with us today. Bye-bye for now.